So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our session on public versus private pros and cons. My name is David Gray. I'm the country managing partner for PricewaterhouseCoopers in Russia. PwC, as one of the leading professional services firms in the world, perhaps is associated very strongly with public companies. So PwC is perhaps in your mind associated with, for example, the audits of big public companies. And it's certainly true that we do audit many of the largest businesses around the world. But actually our business is very diversified, and particularly in terms of some of the strategy advice, tax advice, consulting and other bits of our business, private business is one of the key areas on which we focus. And certainly private business is one of the bits that I see in Russia as one of the areas where we expect to grow most quickly in terms of our own business, working with private business. So whilst I'm sort of agnostic in terms of we work with both public and private companies, I'm certainly very interested to hear how people perceive the pros and cons of that relationship. Is being private, does it have advantages over being public? What are the advantages that taking a company public has? What do they offer to the owners of the business and to the people working in that business? I think also entrepreneurship, as part of the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, entrepreneurship is a concept that is very important at the current development stage of the Russian economy. Looking across we have 10 offices around the regions in Russia, and we see a large pool of entrepreneurial talent developing businesses, growing businesses rapidly, and we see entrepreneurship and the support of entrepreneurship as one of the key areas where government can play a role in terms of government policy around diversification, around modernization, and around social cohesion, the development and cohesion of society. So it's very timely that we're in Moscow for this debate. There are always interesting moments in history, and Russia is usually one of the parts of the world that is closely involved with those interesting moments in history. So we're here at an interesting moment in history on an interesting topic, public versus private. To help me to address that topic, we're going to invite some of my colleagues here to talk to you from different companies and an exchange to share their views on this question about the pros and cons associated with public and private. Capital markets are very important globally. It's very important for the development of the Russian economy that we have a healthy capital market domestically. And the recent changes in the Moscow exchange, in terms of the maturing of that market, are an important part of the infrastructure of the capital markets in Russia. So to help us to understand the point of view from somebody who works with the Moscow exchange, we have Gennady Margolit, who's going to give us a brief presentation about how he sees the pros and cons of private versus public. Gennady is the capital market, innovation and investment market director for the Moscow exchange. So Gennady, I'll invite you to take us through your presentation.
David, спасибо большое.
David was nice to me, so he allowed me to speak Russian, because the majority of in this conference room, so they speak Russian, and it will be easier for me to speak Russian as well. So I was asked to act as an expert, so this has this important mission. And so then I even a bit conscience-stricken to some extent, because I don't think I'm an independent expert in the full sense of the word, because Moscow Exchange certainly is interested in getting companies to the capital markets. And because we are interested in public companies development, because the exchange wants to see the companies that are of interest to investors. And so to drag everyone onto the exchange, so we're not planning to do that. There is no point in that. But before the company makes a decision to go to the exchange, so there is a lot of consultations going on. And so then there is such an interesting tour referred to as the roadshow. So when we take a small company and we show it to some intermediaries, stakeholders, investment banks, show it around to potential funds, foundations, and if they're interested, if intermediaries are interested, if they sink their teeth in this company, so then other foundations are investments, so they go for it because it's a good sign. And this company, to a certain extent, so goes through this first test. And what was going to happen next, much depends on the so usually everything just works out fine, but there can be certain vicissitudes as well. So this how do I change slides? I say it won't work. Okay, only 5 slides. And okay, I got it going. So they asked me to prepare 5 slides. So I did only 2 out of 5, and the remaining 3 I just borrowed, and just to talk about Moscow Exchange and about the investment innovation market. And but at least will be useful for all the entrepreneurs here in this room. Moscow Exchange is the largest in Russia, so the only one. In Central Western Europe is the biggest as well. And its capitalization of the companies that are represented there, so we look pretty good among other BRIC countries. So more than the Warsaw, 4 times bigger than the Warsaw. And then in terms of liquidity, then it's a 70% of the turnover of Central European and Eastern Europe falls to our exchange. So innovation investment market, there's a special segment at the exchange which is designed for young innovation companies, and its main task is just to go to the public market and turn into blue chips eventually. That's the whole point. So then the last advertising pitch. 1, 2. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Okay, and so these are the results of the last 4 years of existence. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. Good. And so the shares, 9 funds traded. So then bonds appeared last year, and so at our exchange, and 2 international companies. One of them is Kiwi, which is not fully international, which is formally is a foreign company, and the exchange-traded fund, another interesting instrument that we use in the American high-tech assets we trade as well. And on the left side, you can see how the share price performance that we place here. So we took just several companies. So you see the placements. And so usually, so we are just above the water, so we are doing pretty good. And so then the way the share price performs, and so quite good. So for the investors who either are happy investors because, or sometimes there are some unhappy investors as well. So now let's. I try to do this kind of SWOT analysis, so pro and contra analysis. It looked very academic. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to sermonize, but I still want to. So why should the company go for an IPO? Why should it suffer and torture itself? And it's easy because it gets very high valuation, better than a private company. So other things being equal, and valuation is much better because the entire investment community evaluates this company, then gets access to the capital markets and raises money, and long money, so which does have to be returned right away, and gets at best evaluation. And so then raising money, it's not a one-time effort. And once the company goes public, it's easier to raise financial resources through loans, through placing bonds, and so then additional issues can be because they have liquid collateral and the financial community knows this company, so they are on the radar. So the analysts, that's why you can get more money. And so then the main motivation of going IPO is expansion. It's mergers and acquisitions. So this is the currency for mergers and acquisitions. The company, by swapping their shares for other shares, can easily just fill up any niche. And then another very important factor is PR and marketing, because an IPO is a very important public event, marketing event, and being a public company is very easy to talk to clients, customers, CEO partners, etc. And so you can go international as well. So that's very good. And eventually, another factor is the ability to motivate management and personnel, the option programs. So these small things, but very pleasant little trifles. And for the shareholders, it's something so that there's a possibility of a good exit, because there's maximum valuation, the market is liquid, and eventually main players are happy, management is happy, investors are happy, intermediaries are happy, everyone is happy, and the investment banks who get good money for this as well. And then about every coin has a reverse side, so flip side. So the price is quite high, because the direct high costs, because IPO is very expensive, because if you go for an IPO, so then a lot of costs involved due to ongoing expenses, payments, external advisors, preparation, and restructuring of the company needs to be done. And so they're turning it an openly held joint stock company, international financial standards, reporting, the works, corporate management, everything just is quite costly and lengthy. And then when you go public, so the life goes on, but only starts. So one of the businessmen who came to our exchange, so he kind of said that IPO is like lifting dumbbells. So he thinks that I just lifted it once and I can just drop it. No, you cannot drop it. You have to hold those dumbbells if you just lift them. So once you're in the market, you have to hold all those dumbbells just all the way up, and you cannot even put them down. And so this is because you need to disclose information, talk to investors, etc. Then it's about the risks and threats. So then there are shareholders, third parties that want good quarterly statements. Some want the results right now. They don't want to wait for tomorrow, and the company needs to deal with those shareholders and keep them happy. So this is very briefly. So the key points, pros and contras. And so the summing it up, I can say that it's true. The situation is different, a specific situation. But if a company has good ambitions, that wants to grow, that wants to go to other markets, expand, scale up, so then, so this is the best choice, an IPO.
Thank you, Gennady, for that introduction of our pros and cons. Clearly, in terms of the capital markets, the Moscow market is an increasingly deep market, and therefore it's going to be interesting to see how Moscow develops. The government has stated, the Moscow city government has stated a desire for Moscow to be an international financial center, and the success of the Moscow Exchange in terms of being a platform for Russian businesses is going to be a very important part of making Moscow a financial center. Every year in PwC, we do a global survey of private and family businesses and ask them a whole series of questions. And one of the key questions that we ask them is, how do they envisage the future of their business? How are they looking at the future of their business? Are they planning to keep it private and within the family, or are they planning to go public? And there's an interesting contrast when we ask that question around the world. Globally, 17% of private or family businesses believe that the future for their business lies with going public. So the vast majority of private businesses globally actually think that the future is going to be still in private hands. And we see many great examples around the world of companies like Johnson & Johnson and other companies who have been private companies over generations of companies and who succeed and continue to thrive. In Russia, the number is not 17% who see themselves continuing to not going private, but going public rather. It's 57%. So clearly in Russia, a lot of people see the future of their business, that they will develop their business, and then at some point they will be taking it public, which is maybe an optimistic thing for Gennady and his market, that so many entrepreneurs in Russia believe that the future for their business is that they will at some point realize value through some kind of transaction, including perhaps taking it public. To help us look a little bit more deeply at some of the advantages that Gennady has highlighted around pros and cons, private versus public, we have two further guests. So let me introduce those for you. The first is Oleg Rybalov from Internet. Internet is the first listed Russian internet retailer, which is listed on the Moscow Exchange. It listed in 2011. My other guest is Ingrid Vanderveldt, who is entrepreneur in residence with Dell, which is one of the largest, which will be familiar to people as one of the largest PC computer producers over the last 40 years, very famous history, which was traded on the NASDAQ since its IPO in 1988, but which in October last year actually went private again. So the founder of the business took it private, took it back into private ownership. So we have two people with different perspectives in terms of the businesses that they're working with, who can share their insights into private versus public. So let me start with a question for Oleg. So Gennady has outlined some of the pros and cons. Can you share with us how those pros and cons worked for your business? Which of those pros and cons impacted your decision about taking the business public, and how do they work in terms of Gennady's dumbbells? Do you feel that you're still holding that dumbbell up, or are you feeling empowered by being a public company?
Здравствуйте, уважаемые коллеги.
Good afternoon. If I understood correctly the question, are we happy that we're a public company, right? Yes. And how it evolved and how it happened, and whether we're satisfied. Right. Yes. For those, Internet, as was said, is the first company that became public in the internet commerce. Because we are involved in e-commerce, electronic equipment we sell, and the media business, and the Yandex Market payment systems. So we're the first IT public company. It was founded in 2004, and in 2009, when the crisis struck, so we started thinking that independently to do business in this market would be all by yourself, so it's impossible, not enough investments, that we had not enough liquidity. Realizing that, we found a private investor, and as one of the long-term options of our strategies was an IPO. At that time, we did not think how it would work out, and where we would be traded, and where we could go for an IPO. We didn't know that. But for us, as shareholders of the company, we were, first and foremost, we wanted just to certainly maximize our shareholders' equity, shareholders' performance, either in the form of dividends or in the form of selling our stake, equity, or in public market, or in the capital markets. So the long-term strategy provided for the company's growth. So we wanted it to grow fast. And until 2010, the company doubled its revenue every year, and continued to do it every year. So because of its own operating activities, but plus so we did some mergers and acquisitions, other players that we merged. So then the internet trading market, so the e-commerce market, is not yet as transparent as elsewhere in Russia. and as other markets. So then internet e-commerce. So only now just we have new agencies, rating agencies appear in Russia that actually that become more transparent, and so they start to publish some reporting, and so so only now just it's beginning to become more transparent. So we faced a dilemma to stay private or just to go public at that time, and at that time. We wanted to do an IPO at an international exchange, so we did not want to. We realized that we were small. We did not want to deceive to delude anyone, and so then we were telling that we were small. So because there were two companies that went for an IPO, Internet-Ru, and that was the company that existed, and Dell. And I think that there would be kind of discussion between the older brother and the younger brother, so because Internet-Ru and Dell. So what problems were raised and how we faced and addressed those issues. So the goals that we wanted to achieve in Russia, what we wanted to get by an IPO. So first we wanted to learn how to work, how to operate like a public company, and then just translate this experience internationally. But first to learn to work. Then we wanted to get liquid assets, to raise money. So we wanted to make our shares liquid. We got this goal, and we achieved that goal. So our shares became liquid. Our equity became liquid. So then there was another idea to develop other markets. We wanted to contribute to the development of the securities in Russia, capital markets in Russia. That's what we wanted, and we wanted to be the first in this in the Russian capital markets, domestic capital markets. So very challenging, and that's a very good bonus that still yields good results. Effectively. So these are the objectives: liquidity, this first one, then to raise additional financing, and at that time what kind of stake, how big the stake should we sell in Russia openly, place. So we needed to figure out, because we wanted to check how much the investors would be ready to buy, because it was not like Ozon and other famous companies. So we valued our stake that we wanted to place, and we wanted to get the right price for it. So we actually it was as good as we expected. So we got good share price for the place stake. So this is it. If any further questions, I'll be happy to.
I should be able to get this right. Thank you, Oleg, for those comments. Maybe we come to Ingrid, because that's a story about somebody seeing the capital markets as an opportunity to help them in terms of their strategy and growth. And Dell is perhaps the poster child now of a business that succeeded very well in going public, but then has pulled back into the private sector. So perhaps, Ingrid, you can share with us a little bit of your insights as to why that made sense for Dell after 25 years as a public company to take the business back private.
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. And to provide a little bit of context on my work with Dell. So I've been with Dell for the past 3 years as Dell's entrepreneur in residence and overseeing entrepreneurial initiatives globally for the company. So I work side by side with Michael Dell and the executive leadership team on strategic initiatives of how can we take this large global corporation. Let me see if I can move this a little closer. I think it's stuck. But how can we take this large global corporation and really get it to be more effective, be more relevant with the innovators globally, with the entrepreneurs and small business owners globally? Dell has made sort of its bread and butter of the business selling to large enterprise. That's what we do very well. We know how to scale our businesses, but philosophically, Michael and I and the rest of the executive leadership leadership team, when we look at where the global economy is going, and you'll hear me often talk about, we don't believe it's actually going to be the Dells of the world that get our economy back on track. It's going to be the entrepreneurs and small business owners who do that. And we need to figure out how, again, you can take a large company like a Dell and make it relevant to these much smaller companies. So when I came on board at Dell, I've myself have built a number of companies in the United States, have sold them, never taken one public, but have sold them off to public companies. And when I joined Michael 3 years ago, one of the first things that I actually said at the time, not knowing that it was even a possibility, but when we were looking at, again, how can we innovate faster? How can we be more flexible as a company? How can we move faster as an organization? One of the first things that I said was, it would be fantastic if we were ever able to take this company private. That would be incredible. It would be a real benefit to Dell. And then, thankfully, as you all have seen, we've been able to accomplish that goal back in October. But the reason that we wanted to take the company private is because, and I experienced this myself, when I joined in at Dell, when you're a public company the size of Dell, I always imagine us as sort of like this big yacht in the sea. If you want to switch direction, make any movement, it takes a long time to do that versus, a little boat that you can just be very flexible and move very quickly. So the time for us to make the kind of changes that we wanted to make as a company to be able to connect with entrepreneurs worldwide, it was just going to take us a long time to do that, more time than we wanted to spend. On top of that, when you're a public company, we were under and have been under the management and the expectations of every 90 days, we owe reports back to all of our shareholders. And while reporting to shareholders is critically important, whether you're public or private, the extent to which the reporting needs to take place as a public company is enormous. The amount of resources that go into that reporting are enormous. And it's not only a division of the company that's focused on that reporting, but it runs throughout the entire organization. So now you've got marketers and salespeople and product developers and the innovators who, instead of thinking, how can we move very quickly to hit a long-term goal, we instead are operating on a 90-day cycle, and it's all focused around the sales. So for us, when we decided to go private, that's put us in a really strong position to take away this sort of 90-day cycle and enable the entire organization to focus on innovation and where we want to go for the long term. So it's been amazing to be part of the process because, as you can imagine, it's not that often that you see a company like a Dell turn around and go private. But for us, it's been an extraordinary experience.
And how quickly has that decision changed the culture in the business? Have you seen an immediate change in terms of how people interact, talking about what people are focused on? Does it feel a very different business as a private business, even though it's only been a matter of months?
Yes, the change was pretty immediate. I will say, in the spirit of just being transparent about it, there certainly was a level of concern, for people who have worked at Dell, their entire lives or have built their careers there. They're used to being part of a public company. There certainly was and at some level continues to be the fear of, well, what happens now? But what Michael did that really helped overcome and really helped create excitement around this is, as soon as the privatization went through, Michael did a fantastic job of communicating across Dell why we did it, what we're trying to do, what you can expect, what this means to those people who have jobs inside of Dell. So again, really created this level of transparency immediately. And that created a level of comfort, again, and excitement around the company. Next to that, we're now just a few months into it, but all of the managers at Dell are really now recalibrating around, okay, how are we going to operate differently? What does that look like? And I imagine it's going to take us a couple years to really fully transform the company overall, but it really was critically important and certainly helpful that Michael has stayed fully transparent with the organization as this was going through.
Thank you for that. Let me come back to Oleg. Hearing Ingrid's passionate espousal of the great boost to innovation and focus that has come from taking the business private. Coming back to your business is obviously right at a sweet spot in terms of innovation and change. How have you dealt with the threat that actually going public, you will lose some of that flexibility and appetite that comes with being a private business in terms of the speed of reaction? Has that been a challenge for you as a public company? Has it impacted your ability to make decisions quickly, for example?
Я вот слушаю
Listening to Ingrid, I go back and remember our talks within the company. So virtually one-to-one, those talks that we have inside, I agree completely that life within the company is changing, and there's a requirement to provide a huge number of document piles that you need to provide on a timely basis, and specific transaction that you cannot virtually. You can't. You can't do just because the law regulates to approve them within the general meeting of shareholders. And as for the strategy or meeting of the board, innovation, financing, new projects, this is huge headache within the project, and it has to do not so much with the bonuses and benefit from IPO. It's rather the balance, the kind of responsibilities and burden of the bonuses that arise when you go public. It's just like the weight that you have to lift and hold, and all the work within the company keeps changing, and still I'm here representing mid-sized business, and this business is not in the foreign market but in the Russian markets, and we are very special from what happens in the West, and it's more loyal to the companies that are here, and this is one. Secondly, still, as the business is not so big as companies like Dell or others, or the peers, but we can make decisions, and the founders and the main shareholder that is instrumental in making key decisions and the type of financing and the investment policy and capex, we can push them quickly and execute quickly, but we probably lose the opportunities that we could have on terms and timing compared to private companies, competitors in the market. But still, we have long-term bonus. The competitors in the market make quick decisions, but the ways they do it in the forms and the results, strategically, they will have to redo many times to redo them over and over again. And some things better have not been done if a competitor intends to go public. In our case, yes, we need to toil, to sweat our brow, but we get something that is of interest to investors in the capital markets. These are totally different market, industry market where the companies work, and capital market. And the decisions that Ingrid mentioned have to do primarily with the industry market, within the market. What are the lines that are opening for the products, and many other aspects. And in our case, we are talking about two targets, two goals. equity and profitability and yield. So there are two different missions. Dell actually increased the value of equity of the company. They raise it, so they have issues in industry area, and Utinet and mid companies that plan to go next. Their development vector, they need to consider the equity market. That's what we do, the capital market. And for the level of companies, IPO as a question for our companies of our size is a part of the life cycle. So a mid-sized company that went public feels it's important to do proper steps with the reports, IFRS reports, to become as big and wonderful as Dell, and probably in a while again go private if the need be from the market.
To Ingrid, in terms of is it the case that actually markets have moved on and we have a much more complicated market? It used to be the case that there was almost like a predestined history that we went through. Private companies were founded, they grew, they had a need for capital, they would maybe start by listing some debt, and then they would move to IPO, and then they would be mature, and then there would be mergers, acquisitions, and da-da-da. Are we seeing a more complicated environment where there are things like mezzanine capital with hedge funds and private equity, and these types of structures are actually creating a more complicated environment in which we will see businesses moving in and out depending on where they are in terms of strategy, and perhaps businesses floating off parts of in terms of products and segments within the business, and it will be a richer, more complicated story rather than that perhaps rather predictable story that we used to see.
Well, and I think that those are really, really strong questions and something for all of us to think about, because I definitely think that in terms of the options on financing, there actually hasn't been a lot of change in that, as we all know, for many, many years. The financing and the different levels of financing, you mentioned the hedge funds, the mezzanine financing, the Series A through whatever series, going public, getting a buyout, those things haven't changed. But I can tell you from personal experience that the expectations of how a company is expected to grow and what the exit strategy is supposed to be, I think we are definitely seeing a change there. When I started my first company, I actually was funded by the same funders of Dell. My mentor was the same as Michael Dell. We had a lot of the same characteristics in our companies. And this was, so when I started my first company, it's probably about 15 years ago now. And even 15 years ago, similar to Dell, the expectation was start your company and build it to take it to an IPO. And the idea of being an acquired company, that actually wasn't seen as something as promising as taking your company public. And so that's what we were always set up to do. And it just turned out in our case, we ended up being acquired in that first business because the market started to crash. It was during the dot-com bust, and a Japanese company came in, and we felt very fortunate to actually get a buyout, but it wasn't by any means the big win that everybody expected. And I think what we're seeing now, as you know, because we went through the market crash, because we have gone through a depression in the market, it's forcing investors, including myself, to be a lot more thoughtful and creative about, again, what are we ultimately trying to do with our businesses? And I think that's fundamentally the question, certainly that Michael asked himself, but the question that as entrepreneurs we need to ask ourselves as we're building our companies is, what are you ultimately trying to do? If you are a company that you want to launch a business that defines a new industry, that has lots of shareholders, that you're in it for the long run, then taking a company public, that could be a great option for you. But also having your company acquired, if you're a fast-moving entrepreneur, you want to create innovation that has a major impact in the market, you want to create a really strong return for your investors, being an acquired company is actually a really strong option. And so I think what we've really seen in terms of the shift of expectations in the market is investors and entrepreneurs have become a lot more knowledgeable about realistic expectations on the exit. And we no longer are starting businesses saying you have to take it public. We're starting businesses that focus on what are we trying to do long term, how are we trying to be profitable, and then what is the best mix and the best way to get there. And it doesn't mean you have to take it public, and it doesn't mean you have to take it private.
Gennady, let me come back to you in terms of that. You talked about the road shows, and we've heard about the complexities in the market and the other alternatives that entrepreneurs face in terms of how they can realize value. For the markets, what are the key elements of a successful story? And I know that they will vary for different companies, but where do you see the strength of the Moscow exchange in terms of what are the types of businesses that you're hoping to attract onto the exchange, and what are the types of stories that those businesses have to have?
Oh, thank you for such a good question. Да, я по-русски буду говорить.
I will switch to Russian. I guess I will be talking within the limits of my competence. We have been working with so-called innovation companies. We mean a wide range of companies, high-tech companies, and maybe IT, internet, biotechnologies, whatever you take it, but without the resource sector and no retail or the like. Speaking about the reasons and the motivation and arguments that we provide to companies to somehow about the idea, to see the idea, the idea of going public. Russia is special because we do not have long experience of public market. We are new, we are young, and the companies that emerged lately so far have not absorbed yet the culture of functioning as a public company. And therefore, very important role is educational work. And starting from the cradle, from startup, we try to explain to the companies that the IPO to go public is a very realistic prospect, and from the very start you have to have that in mind, being transparent, complying to standards, and so on, and saying that what are the motives and what are the companies in our case. There are two more or less clear categories. First, rather relatively small but very quickly growing companies that have serious ambitions, but a set of sources for development and for financing is restricted because the companies are not big and they have this high-tech nature. And it would not allow to have this set of assets that could be used as a pledge, a collateral to get the loans, the credit, to get access to credit, to borrowed funds. So it's not from fat years, fat life that the companies have to go to IPO, and so-called alternative sites that emerge since the early 90s under the umbrella of large exchanges allow such young, ambitious, fast-growing companies to create opportunities to go public. This is something that was missing before, and the companies with kind of venture properties can go public. And the second category includes large, mature companies for which the public market is a natural way of development. I am not taking giants like Dell, but I'm talking about the Russian companies. And they have this multi-criterial purpose to access the capital market. This is marketing and money and funds and everything. But very often the company would select international exchanges sites because they have all the wherewithal, all the set of conditions, which is very important from the point of view of marketing, prestige, and sometimes these considerations prevail over pure economic considerations because Moscow, MOEX is maybe cheaper and the investors are there and the foreign investors, and we have now launched all the technologies that are relevant to Western stock exchanges. So I guess that's it.
In terms of some of the observations which Gennady just made about, access to capital and the prestige that goes with being IPO and able to use that in terms of attracting partners and things like this, is there a danger for Dell that you lose some of those advantages as a private business? Is that something that concerns you in terms of the process of going private?
So I think the question around are there concerns going private, I wouldn't be truthful if I said no. There aren't any concerns. There are, for sure. And I think, when the company went private, especially at first in the United States, if you watch the media, a lot of people were saying, what is Michael doing? Why are we doing this? And there was a lot of doubt around what was happening. Now, that said, what we are hoping through this, we're making very, very aggressive moves at Dell to really leverage this very unique opportunity to gain a worldwide leadership position in a number of different areas. And it's going to be a lot of hard work. Like I said, the next 2 years are not going to be easy years for us. But what we're actually taking a lot of self-pride in and taking a lot of responsibility around is just like going public was what the expectations were 15 years ago and beyond that this is what you were expected to do. We really are looking at this as an opportunity to redefine the possibility of keeping your company private, and or if you're a public company and you're really trying to make very sort of meaningful, significant, very fast moves that will put you in a worldwide leadership position for the long run, taking your company private again is a very viable option. And so because there aren't a lot of companies out there that we can point our fingers at and say they did it and we're going to do it too, there's a lot of responsibility on us as a company to prove that this in fact is the right decision and will continue to be the right decision, not only for us but for a lot of global corporations. So there certainly is going to be doubt until we prove that model out, but that is our intention.
Coming again back to Oleg, in terms of that, Ingrid's talked about the communication and Michael Dell talking to the team and explaining the reasons for going private. I guess the same applies in terms of winning the hearts and minds of people in a business when you go public, that people can feel that is a negative for them, that they're losing the sense of entrepreneurialism and ownership. Is that something that you've dealt with? You've been public now for over 2 years. Is that something that has impacted your business? Is that something that you are working with?
So the first part of the question about the hearts and minds of the employees and the top managers. So in our case, it cannot probably be considered a frequent one for the companies that go public, but for those that develop dynamically, the company culture leaves room for many changes, and the project, for instance, to do that have never been around. Same goes for our company, and in-house we are ready for any changes, for any challenges and new projects, no matter how fresh and breakthrough we are. Shall we be pioneers or shall we follow the hard track that has been there? And the people who go for IPO and do it for the first time, and we perceive this as a challenge, as an opportunity to prove ourselves to ourselves and the others that we are good in the market. And we communicated this position at the IPO period. And as for the second part of the question, what are the ways to polish in-house inside the company? We work on the processes, business processes to do with reporting, timely manner of providing, submitting documents, regulation, compliance, whatever. So for us, it was a pool of tasks that to do things that we have to do in the context of our public nature, especially considering the venture business and the retail business in Russia. It's special. It's rather convoluted, as in Russia. Public companies or the companies that position themselves as completely transparent and open for a wide range of people, so-called white companies, and their number is limited, and it's only recently that the owners or managers of the company perceive transparency and public nature as an asset, like data coherence and integrity. And now we see a largely top 20 companies that position themselves and say that they trade in this market, about their volumes and things. All those companies have a strategy, investment strategy, and shareholding their strategy as, in the form of IPO, not a local but Western. And e-commerce market is special because huge money would be invested to stay in leadership position. I believe that within the next few years, this leader will take shape. Now it is on the way. It is kind of still boiling.
If you like, the discipline. We heard about some of the disciplines and having systems and that comes with being a public company. Perhaps there is more external pressure to have rigor around what your story is. You know, if you have to share that story outside the business, there is a need, for example, when you're doing your roadshow, to go through the logic of what exactly is the story of what we're doing with our business, and perhaps that brings a little bit more discipline to, well, hang on, now that I try and write it down, I see a gap in that story in terms of what we're doing. Isn't there a risk with or a benefit for public businesses that this greater transparency around what the business purpose is and the story actually does bring greater discipline in terms of business planning, strategy, and that there is an upside from that element of being a public company?
Yeah. So just to clarify, so you're referring, so when you are a public company, that rigor is...
Yeah, you know, the analysts are going to ask the question, so, you know, why are you going off what seems to be off-core part of the business, etc.?
Got it.
And you have to have a convincing explanation, otherwise the market will tell you that they don't believe that story.
Yeah, oh, okay. So I think that, first of all, absolutely, when you're a public company, I mean, the reason that, you know, the public markets are a very popular place for investors is because of that level of transparency and that level of reporting. You know, now you call yourself a mid-sized business, but now the fact that you're public and people can see what your plans are, how are you executing to plan, are you below or above your expectations, that is part of what helps build confidence with investors, whether they make a decision to invest or not. So certainly when you take that element away, you know, it's going to open up the opportunity for people to ask the question, well, what exactly are you doing now? And I think, you know, from that perspective, and without telling any big secrets, but if you look at the space, the IT market in general that Dell operates in, you know, Dell, again, going back to our bread and butter business, was based on a guy who built computers out of the trunk of his car. And we're really good at making boxes. People have known us for our boxes. You know, they know we can help scale businesses. They know we're really, really great at hardware. But there are a lot of things that Dell does as a business that a lot of people, I would say, really haven't been that aware of. For example, our software and services. For example, I like to tell the story that for entrepreneurs, like, do you all know Redbox as an example? Redbox business, do you guys know that? It's very popular in the United States, but basically it's where you can walk up to a kiosk, put in your credit card, and you can order out a movie, okay? Well, a couple years ago, Redbox would come to Dell and say, hey, I need you to sell me a bunch of tablets so that I can put you in the computer screen so that when somebody walks up to the kiosk, they can work on your tablets and they can order movies. What they didn't know is that Dell actually has a solution that Redbox now, the CEO of Redbox, can go up to the person who runs this OEM division and say, I need 1,000 kiosks delivered to 1,000 locations around the world. Can you deliver that? And Dell will do that, soup to nuts. And so when you look at opportunities like the ability to share that story, the ability to offer software and services, that's a big shift in the story Dell has always told. And so in going private for us, it has raised a lot of questions, which is exactly what we wanted. When the market says, what are you doing now? Where are you going? Why are you taking your company private? And it gives us the opportunity now to tell a very different story. Not a story that's around, here's what we're trying to accomplish over the next 90 days, here are our hardware sales, but instead redefine the story around how we can be an end-to-end solution provider and talk about all these other areas of the business that historically Dell hasn't been known for. But I can tell you right now, I mean, even in my own business that I run for Dell, that story I told you about Redbox, that OEM division, that's 70% of all of the sales that my division generates comes from that. And now, after we went private, I was just looking at our sales numbers yesterday, we're now at 514% of where we thought we would be at this time in the year. So our sales have just taken off because people are asking the question, what exactly is going on? It gives us the chance to tell a different story.
Can I come back to Gennady again and talking about technology and also storytelling? You mentioned, you know, there is a cost associated with being a public company around compliance and reporting, etc. Do you think technology is going to impact capital markets in terms of reducing the cost of being a public company, in terms of the ease with which business will be able to share information with the owners of the business, with the shareholders of the business? Is technology going to be an important thing for the Moscow Exchange in terms of how competitive the Moscow Exchange is as a place to list companies?
So if the IT as a means to reduce costs, yeah, the companies that go for an IPO, yeah, and that's yeah, sure, because we do have those computer electronic systems that are so then accounting, reporting systems, IT systems, so they all exist and they certainly reduce costs. And so when it certainly, because the load, the burden is very high on the public company from the viewpoint, as Ingrid was talking about that, and you were talking, so we call this reporting, so this so labor intensive, time consuming, a lot of red tape. And that is why naturally all these new modern technologies, they allow to automate, reduce costs, simplify. And so here I can tell you example of Moscow Exchange. It's a public company too, because last year we went for an IPO, and now just so we understand, we feel all these costs and what we can do about it. But I should say that our exchange is an IT company in its nature. It's an IT company, and this is one of the most serious, I would say, instruments, competitive instruments. It's the trading system, computer trading system that our stock exchange has. And our system is very high tech, and all these concomitant things for the exchange are very important. But I don't see before public and after we went public. So it was pretty much the same because everything was automated, computerized, ITized. Everything was there, and then the exchange uses a lot of other very convoluted systems, monitoring, oversight, compliance. So we had it before, even before it went public, and so that we're not afraid of that, and it helps to cut costs. But there's a question. May I ask a question, Ingrid, because time is running short, but I have very interesting questions. So Ingrid, I want to ask you a question. When this process of when you were leaving public market and going private, so then when you were changing this status, what about the shareholders? Were the shareholders happy to stop being part of the company? How painful, how long and difficult this process of changing from public? Was it a buyout of shares? How did you? Because I as the representative of the stock exchange, I'm very much interested because this is very valuable experience. So how we can replicate your experience? Did you make many people unhappy?
I'm laughing with the question because if you followed the process of Dell going private, it was many times it was very painful. And part of what was painful about it is we have a guy in the United States, Carl Icahn, who was bidding up against Michael, and it really was a matter of which side of the story are you going to believe? Are you going to, go with what Carl Icahn was proposing? And Carl Icahn was making the pitch that essentially Dell needed to be under new management, and he wanted to take the company one direction. And then you have Michael Dell, who obviously is the founder of the company, saying, Carl Icahn doesn't know what he's talking about, and you have to be involved in the business day to day to really know what it is that we really have to offer and where we're going to take the company long term. And so this process for, in many ways, from an entrepreneur's perspective, I found it wildly exciting and learned a lot, but it was at times very painful. Because we weren't sure for quite some time what was going to happen with the company. And what I can say is once the company went private, there was overall, not only certainly within Dell, but you could see in the United States, just this almost a huge sigh of relief that the ownership of the company went back to the guy who created it from the beginning, has a very clear vision on what he wants to do with it in the future, and had the transaction gone a different direction, there were a lot of unknowns. So at this point, the general sense of it is positive. And like I said, we've got a lot of work to do. We're not saying this is going to be easy and it's a cakewalk. It's not going to be easy, but we have a vision for where we're going in the future. We have the people, the resources, the technology, and the money to get there. So now it really does come down to how well we execute, and we have been pretty well known for a company that knows how to execute. So hopefully that's helpful.
In terms of Mr. Icahn, hopefully our speakers do know what they're talking about. So I'd like to throw it open to the floor now to invite anyone in the audience who would like to ask a question. If you can put your hand up, we'll get a microphone to you. When you ask your question, can you please identify first who the question is to, so that they have a chance to focus on the question as you ask it. Can we take the microphone at the back?
Can Andrei Artishev. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an innovative startups, and I love this lecture. My question to Ingrid. Ingrid, I listened to this lecture, very interesting case, but the more I listened, the more I got the impression that you proved beyond any doubt that the problem with Dell is not with the shareholders' equity, but the problem is elsewhere in the country. They say that it's very difficult for a public company to develop its business, but such companies like Samsung and other companies, they feel fine making money, being public, tens of billions of revenues. And maybe the problem was, Dell's problem was not it was public, but because three companies like Samsung, so they're public, but because Dell as Nokia, they just lost the market of smartphones, and so you were lagging behind, and so you're biting the dust, and that's why you decided to go private. And so then the tablets or smartphones, there are no Dell smart, so there are HTC tablets, Apple tablets, and you just lost the market, and that's why you decided to go private. And so what was the real reason of you going private?
The question's concise as well, please. But maybe Ingrid, you can respond to that one.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I think that's very brave of you to ask that, because it's not an easy question, and it's certainly an understandable one. So I think that overall, I mean, I joined Dell for a number of reasons. I've been a lifelong entrepreneur. I never thought I would work with a large company, but I know Michael, and I saw the potential of where the company was going and wanted to be part of that. I think it fundamentally comes down to, if you compare us device to device on smartphones, for example, you're right, Nokia, Samsung, they got us. We got in late. There's no getting around that. But if you look at where our mergers and acquisitions have been over the past 2 years, if you've researched any of that, you can it'll start showing you where our heads are at. And if you look at the technology in the IT market in general, I think one of the most impressive things that I got from Michael and from Dell and continue to get is that we're recognizing that it's not necessarily just about the hardware anymore. At the end of the day, whether I buy this device or that device or whatever, they fundamentally do the same thing. And what's going to differentiate us is our knowledge about what customers want, our ability to service them, our ability to provide the software that gets them the solutions that they need, and certainly the hardware that's going to support that. And so in making this move, it's allowed us to really refocus the company to the future that we want.
Thank you. Let's take another question.
I represent the board of directors of a state company, state-owned. A question to Ingrid. In Russia, some companies, so they sold shares and at 12 rubles, and then during the crisis they bought them back at 1 ruble. So using during the crisis, so they buy back and went back private. So how did you buy back? What was the mechanism of buyback? Because how did you buy back your shareholders' equity physically?
So that's a great question. Again, I appreciate the questions because I too find what Dell went through wildly fascinating, and it's great learning to be part of that. In terms of exactly the mechanism of how all of that happened, I mean, essentially, I mentioned Carl Icahn before, but it really did come down to a proposition made by Michael and the other private equity firms on a share price that then had to be presented not only to our shareholders, but the board of directors. And it really came down to a vote, and it was, do they want our price with our vision, or do they want Icahn's price and his vision? And simply came down to that vote, and the shares were bought out at that price. So that's essentially the very, very simple version of how that happened.
Let's take another question. We have one at the front here.
Belousov Dmitry, business incubator. To Oleg, in your view, if a Russian company follows your way and becomes a public, so there are costs. So to keep being public, you have to have current costs. It will depend what size company is that, what kind of business they own. If we say about commensurate size, so the same as us, for example, so then in this respect, there are two types of costs. So there's the cost related to doing an IPO, right? When you go to the exchange, and the second cost that's annual operating costs, monthly operating costs. So the biggest cost is to set up procedures to collect reporting, from different areas. And to support yourself being public, depending on how actively are going just to work in the capital markets. So how actively are going to be involved, how actively are going to be to promote your company, to sell your shares. So that's, if you just do it very actively, then certainly it will cost go high. If you want to sell more shares, so this way they may vary. The cost may vary from 1 million rubles a month to anything. So the sky is the limit. So it's depending on how many shares, how big stake you want to place and sell. So then there are annual reporting procedures which requires. So then IFRS, consolidated business reporting, profit and loss statements. So then the auditor's opinion. So long-term strategy. If you place in the Western exchanges, and it will go up. So the cost will go up because you have in 3 years reporting. Already you have just to subscribe not only with the Russian auditors, so in Russia it will be fine, but for foreign investors, if they buy your equity, so they do not accept the services of a Russian auditor, so they will need the services of an American, so PricewaterhouseCoopers should be just internationally recognized company should provide the opinion. And that's another cost. That's so then annual costs, annual maybe 20 million rubles, depending on the type of your business and the goals that you set for yourself, strategic goals, long term.
Defend auditors in terms of cost, because I think going back to this idea about what public companies bring, part of what it brings is around this higher, because they're held to higher standards by the exchanges and by the regulators, there is this greater transparency which actually reduces your capital costs in terms of access to capital markets, your cost of capital, which helps businesses, particularly businesses that are looking for growth and looking for growth capital. It can be a very cost-effective thing, even though the thing you focus on immediately is the cost. The actual return on that investment can be considerable. Let's take another question from the audience. One at the back here, the lady at the back.
Veronica, General Director of Xida Ventures Company. Could you help me? A question to all of you. What's your take? Where can be the competitive advantages of Moscow as a site for placement equity?
Да, спасибо за, так сказать, возможность.
I think so. Thank you for a chance to answer, because for us, as you see, it's very important. It's a key question. So the exchange is in a competitive environment. And you know that we trade not only in Moscow but in other London Exchange and Nasdaq, Deutsche Börse and others. We trade there as well. Then but the company, so a small company to go abroad makes no sense. It will be prohibitively expensive because the costs, if you are not so big, so they are very, very high. And you won't be able to handle that. Lawyers' costs, legal costs, investment banks' cost, etc. So if the company is in Russia and skip business is a domestic business, then so our recommendation would be honest recommendation. So true, you can go just talk to other exchanges, we don't mind, but you will come back to us. And then there are some categories of investors who are present in Russia, but they are not in Western Russian retail, for example. They're not available. Russian individuals, so more convenient to buy here than abroad, and they're not present in other exchanges. And the other way around, it's not true, because foreign investors cannot buy through Russian exchanges, with the exception of pension funds, who have certain limits for entering and trading abroad. Buying abroad. So much depends on the size. If the company is a mega huge company and the deal is huge, then maybe you can go just dual listing, and you can place in both, like Kiwi. Kiwi placed at NASDAQ and partly in Moscow Exchange, and that would be my answer.
Either of you want to comment on that?
Я также присоединяюсь.
I would echo that statement. Western exchanges, large companies can place. So Moscow Stock Exchange gives you a chance for medium, small companies to offer their shares, securities to sell their shareholders. That was not so. But to do it in a Western exchange for a small business is impossible. And then certainly it will cost too much, prohibitively, much higher than in Moscow. So I agree, I confirm what
Do we have one more question? If we don't have any more questions, let me just make a couple of concluding comments. Let me comment on that last question. In terms of PwC, we are, as Oleg mentioned, we're an international brand in terms of working across, we work across, I think, some 147 different countries. So we have experience of working both as a local business, and our business is a Russian business in Russia, as well as having that international aspect to the business. We strongly believe that local capital markets are extremely important for, particularly for the smaller companies when they first come to markets. They're very important, depending on the nature of the business, the sector, etc., that they can be an important source of, the local markets can be an important source of capital. And we strongly believe that Moscow can, in a country of 142 million people, if there are some structural changes in terms of increasing the amount of capital available locally, that the local exchange could be an extremely important player in its own right because of the size of the domestic economy. Russia is one of the top 6 economies in the world, and that's even at depressed current levels of GDP. So we think the Moscow Exchange has every opportunity to be an extremely important market and to attract a lot of local investments, and it's something that local businesses, particularly small, medium-sized businesses, should look very closely at Moscow as a possibility. The first thing I'd like to do is thank our speakers, so can I ask you to join me in thanking our speakers today? I'd also like to thank the audience. Thank you for your participation. I think what's come out of this debate is there is no definitive answer. You're not going to get pros and cons. You're not going to get private is best, public is best. I think we've explored some of the different aspects that explain that at different times in a business's life cycle, the answer can be different. And Dell is the classic example of even big companies. It can be a good moment to go back into private hands, particularly when you're facing challenging circumstances around implementing a changing course, a new strategy. I think the complexity of the markets out there is another new reality, that there isn't a simple story, that we're going to see complicated solutions to the fundamental issue about how businesses thrive. How can you as entrepreneurs grow your business? How can you access talent? How can you access capital? And you have the opportunity to use both the private route and the public route, and both can be relevant depending on the stage of your company and what your current plans are with those companies. With that in mind, let's draw this to a conclusion. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the Congress. Spasiba.